Hello there. We are live, and in just a moment, we'll be kicking off a really fascinating interview with Tim Brown of SolarWinds. This is the last session of the day, so thanks for joining us. And my name is Martin SFP Bryant. I'm a journalist and a marketer, and somehow managed to blur those lines successfully without being a little awkward. So that's a good thing that I quite enjoy. But today I'm here for a session that when I was asked to moderate it, I thought, yes, please, immediately. This sounds really fascinating because I have an interest in cybersecurity. I followed this story as it was unfurling last year, and it just tells us a lot about the state of the world today and a lot of the threats we need to be aware of in business. So Tim Brown is VP Security and CISO at SolarWinds, and he found himself in the middle of one of the largest supply chain attacks in history, as hackers used SolarWinds software as one of the vectors to breach the security of hundreds of businesses and organizations around the world. Being responsible for security at SolarWinds, Tim is a great person to ask to find out more about the attack and what we can learn from it to make our businesses safer. So if you've got a question for Tim, do use the chat function in Pathable to do that. We only have 25 minutes, but I'll try and get as many of your questions to Tim as possible. So Tim, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Martin. Great to be here.
So I think I gave a very, very brief summary of what happened there, but I think some people might not be familiar with this story. So could you tell us a bit about exactly what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. So December 12th, almost a year ago, we were informed by FireEye on a Saturday, December 12th, that we had shipped tainted code. And, that's kind of a security guy's nightmare, right? That, we had shipped code that had, not been written by us. And the good part of that discovery by FireEye is it gave us enough information so that we didn't have to do a big research project to determine whether it was true or not, right? So quickly determined it was true, and right on Saturday determined it was true. With that, we started bringing in partners, started up our incident response process, started to do threat hunts internally, brought in some leading forensics teams to be able to determine, hey, how did this happen? What went on? How do we move forward? Quickly involved FBI, CISA, NCSC from the outside, put together information about how customers should move forward. Were you affected or not? Right? That was one of the big questions that many had. So trying to get information back out, very, very important. Threat actor turned out to be, Russian SVR. That's what it is been attributed to by U.S. government and others. Attribution was one of those things that we left to the third parties. We left to the governments of the world. We left to the law enforcement of the world. We just, needed to focus on customers, needed to focus on getting them right, where we could allow attribution and really to the threat actor to be there. Some say this was one of the most sophisticated attacks that occurred. The threat actor very thoughtful in what they did. Threat actor didn't make we're not noisy inside of my environment. Came in, essentially looked at email for about 9 months, and they were able to examine email. Then they did a test run in October. Test run had nothing except a benign return on it. Then they came back in March with 2,500 lines of code that were inserted into the product, existed for 3 months, 3 months and 3 releases, essentially March through June. Then they shut their command and control server down in October. So they left us in June and then shut their command and control server down. So absolutely very mission centric. Very sophisticated in their program and what they did. The code that they dropped waited 14 days to run. Tried to evade detection, wouldn't run inside of SolarWinds. So a lot of very sophisticated actions that this threat actor took. And that's one of the things that we have to look out for in the future.
Yeah, so they really played the long game there.
They did, absolutely. They're patient, quiet, stealthy. They would come in to do a specific function and leave, right? And then come back in and do a specific function and leave. So very mission-based in what they were attempting to do. So when we first saw the incident, we took a high number. We said, 18,000 people have downloaded this version or these 3 versions that were affected. So our initial announcement was that 18,000 customers, may have been affected. Fast forward to a number of months later, and we see that about 100 customers actually went to stage 2. Stage 2 meaning that the threat actor, that they could reach the command and control server. So it had to be able to, the code that was dropped needed to be able to talk out to the open internet to reach the command and control server. Then actions were taken within that site. Software that was dropped, press thought that it did a lot of things, but it essentially just gave you a backdoor with a privileged access to the Windows machine that was running Orion. From there, the threat actor attempted to move laterally within the environment, but it did do that backdoor.
Yeah. So a really complicated attack, and something that a few years ago would have sounded wild. Obviously, that's had a massive effect on your business and your company over the past year, and we'll go into some of that a bit later. But looking back now, how are you doing? You were at the center of this. You were charged with dealing with this at the company. How are you doing? How's SolarWinds doing?
Yeah, SolarWinds is doing okay, right? We've had a large amount of our customers move forward with us. There's still a few that are on the fence. There's a few that we convince that we're still a safe company to move forward with. Going through this effort, makes you look internally, makes you look at products, makes you make changes to make things better, right? Things that you wouldn't necessarily do unless you had an incident like this. So when you have great partners in your environment for 5 months trying to inspect, trying to find things, they find things, you fix them. So Crowdstrike, KPMG were in our environment. Then from a build perspective, we made everything more resilient. We, instead of just going from source code to build supply chain to product, we now go in 2 ways, right? We get to product, we decompile the product and link back to source code. So we put safeguards in place. We define new build processes that are kind of leading edge for what they're doing, and really making builds more deterministic between one build to the next. So that work has been appreciated by many. That work has been, appreciated by most. That's why you see that, just since we're a public company, that's where we measure. From a public company, we're still doing very well, still growing at a reasonable percentage, still having plenty of renewals. And, we think a large part of that is due to the response that we took and the responsibility we took for what happened.
Yeah, and I suppose one question that some people might have is often the response to a serious situation like this that kind of is a major threat to the future of the business is heads must roll. Let the person who was responsible for this go, or let the person responsible for that section of the business under which it happened go. And so some people might say, how are you still in a job? What's the thinking behind that? It seems to be a bit more sophisticated than just heads must roll.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes that's the easy path forward, right? But when you go through this, you have to realize what is needed, right? My head could roll anytime, I guess, still, right? But right at the beginning of this, it was, we need to communicate to the world leaders. We need to communicate to every government in the world. We need to communicate to law enforcement. We need to communicate to, our customers of the world. I was one that was doing a lot of that. So for when it was happening, I was, a critical component to what our response was. And, from a CISO perspective, I think it is important that people develop skills to be able to speak externally, develop skills to be able to feel comfortable with speaking to boards, speaking to, 1,000 people audiences, speaking with facts, not going over and above what those facts can tell, answering hard questions, being prepared to answer those questions. So, luckily my career had led me to doing those things in the past. So when something needed to be done like this, I could, step right in and do those things. But that's not the case for many security professionals. Many security professionals are in the back rooms, right? So very important that we bump up our skill sets, because if I didn't have those skill sets, they would have had to replace me, right? No question. Somebody needed to be the face. Somebody needed to be the one that was speaking. Somebody needed to be out there. I was lucky enough to already have those skills. And one of the things that our CEO said, that question was asked from an RSA conference, and he said, "Well, if I was going to hire somebody, I hire somebody like Tim. So why would I get rid of him?"
Great, yeah, it's interesting you say about communication being important, being an important factor in the response to this, as much as the technical side of it, and we'll come back to that a bit later. But on the technical side of it, Olu Odoniyi on the chat says, "What do you think about some of the security operational criticisms exacted by various onlookers? Because certainly in the media there was a lot of criticism about SolarWinds security, like you hadn't invested in enough security, for example." So what's your response to that?
Yeah, so we invested a little bit above what the industry norm was. So we absolutely invested well. Investing well does not stop this type of threat actor. And could we have invested more? Absolutely. Can we take lessons from this? Absolutely. Can we get better from this? Absolutely. Did we have a reasonable security program in place? Yeah, definitely. Some of the information that was floating around there was, just in media, anybody that could talk could talk. Many of the people that were quoted from 5 years ago before I started. And, anybody in tech, look back what things were 5 years ago. Right? They change, they shift, they modify. 5 years is a lifetime, but that's what folks are sometimes quoting as fact. So, media looks for news, media looks for bad news sometimes. One of the things through this response, we did not get hung up with trying to defend ourselves very much, right? Very, very, very little, if any. What our focus was do we know what our customers are? Do we know if the customers are safe? Can we get customers to upgrade if they're on an unsafe version? Can we determine things that will make this so it can't happen again? So that was the level of, that was the approach that we did. So, fighting back to, media reports, very difficult and, not kind of worth the time at the point of the incident. So what we've tried to do is show with our actions and what we've done, try to help the community, help the world, that, hopefully people can see that. But yeah, you get a lot of misinformation out there, and if you try to fight it, you'll be fighting it all the time and not, lose sight of the real mission that you're on.
Yeah. So you obviously have had a long career in cybersecurity, very experienced, know a lot of the threats out there, but this was obviously a very significant worldwide news kind of thing. What did you learn about the nature of modern cybersecurity and the threats that people need to know about from this attack?
So it sounds fairly simple, but the so incredible, thoughtful, mission-centric nature of this attack shouldn't have been a surprise, but it was a surprise, right? That people were so focused and were able to, evade defenses that are internal because they were so focused and quiet. They hid themselves in the background noise. They did it extremely well. So the fact that the mission-centric, super thoughtful nation-state attack is, really true and really there. And I've talked to many customers throughout the world, and what they say in certain industries is, "Yep, that happened to us. They attacked us internally, right? But we didn't tell anybody about it, right? Because we didn't need to." So where we're going from the theory of these types of attackers to these guys are absolutely existing. Their models are absolutely true. Their models are at so much of a different level that you need to protect yourself against. You have to go beyond, a simple, go beyond what you have in your your detection and your response areas, and get to a different level to combat this level of threat actor. And one of the things that history shows us is that if a attack works, that attack is then mimicked by others. So do we think organized crime? Do we think ransomware? Do we think others will take more long-term mission-based attack approach? Absolutely, because when you're looking at making $10 million, you can spend a year, right? So those are some of the things that we learned.
Yeah, and many of the people watching this won't have a software company where their software might get inserted into their customers' businesses and cause problems, but they may very well be thinking, okay, so you're talking about this threat. What do I need to do as a business owner, as a business manager, to keep safe? So in light of what you've said about the modern threat model out there, what do people need to be considering?
So you always start with good hygiene, no question, right? But then understand what those threat actors would be after. Understand what your crown jewels, your critical assets are, and then for those assets, really take an assume breach model. So we've done triple things in a lot of places. So in order to affect my build, I do 3 builds now. So and check the results with no one person having access to all 3. So therefore, if somebody wants to affect my build now, they would have to get collusion between 3 people, one of them being a higher level architect in the process. So 3, right? Look at visibility. Can you see everything across your environment? And do you know when the subtle noise can create something else? And so for me, visibility meant 3 SOCs. So I have Crowdstrike on everywhere in their service, on workstations and servers. Take that information, bring it into SecureWorks as another layer, and then I have my own SOC on top of it for another layer. But I know not everybody can do that, right? So one of the things you have to do is say, how much visibility do I have within my environment? What risk do I face for those things that they will care about? And are the things that they will care about locked down to the most extent possible? We can use words like microsegmentation, zero trust, other things that help in that path. But don't forget to think, right? It's not just about installing a product. It's think about what an adversary would be after for you, whether it's a ransomware adversary, whether it's a nation state, whether it's a lesser adversary, and make sure you understand what they would be after, and then you're doing extra steps to bring that as locked down as possible in the environment.
Being more careful than perhaps you think you should be, kind of an excess of caution, would you say?
Excess of caution, but also not necessarily an excess of caution across your entire environment, right? Because you probably can't afford it, right? Can't afford to have great security everywhere. But if 20% of your assets, 20% of your information, 20% of your people fit that high risk profile and that attack profile, treat them special, right? And maybe you'll have to give up land on the other 80%, but guess what? It won't have as much of effect as that 20%.
Okay, so making sure you allocate your resources in a smart way. Okay, yeah.
And make sure you think about what the adversary is thinking about and try to outthink them. Don't just buy a product and you're done, right? So have thought exercises and bring other people into your thought exercises.
Yeah, and I suppose the whole nation state aspect of it, we're seeing more nation state hackers out there than ever before. They're in the news all the time now, and targeting companies that might not, they're not the kind of government agencies and things like that you might expect. So all sorts of businesses really can be of interest, either because of their client bases or the kind of work they do. So
energy, right? Anything in critical infrastructure. And then look at the ransomware, where ransomware can pay off, millions of dollars. If you've got $1 million paycheck coming, are you willing to invest 6 months in research and 6 months in thought and 6 months to be able to, circumvent someone's security? Absolutely. So think about the things that are most important in the environment and really protect them at different levels.
Yeah. You did mention CrowdStrike earlier,
Yeah.
and Robert Williams on the chat asks, I don't know if he works for CrowdStrike. He says, what was it like working with CrowdStrike?
Yeah.
Was assistance given by law enforcement, etc.?
Yeah,
So during the attack.
Yeah, great question. So, one of the things that we brought in is, DLA Piper is our legal partner. DLA Piper is one of the largest legal firms in the world, I guess. They have a great forensics team. Those forensics folks and cyber folks are ex-FBI as well. So we brought them in to start as a quarterback. And we brought our threat hunt team in, which was CrowdStrike. CrowdStrike was great to work with. We instrumented every workstation, every server in the environment. The question was, are they still there? Right? So CrowdStrike was helping us figure that out. Was it an insider? What did somebody do? What was an anomaly? Let's dig down to every anomaly that we found within the environment. So CrowdStrike, top notch. One of the things that we found, though, is CrowdStrike was not a development company, right? They really were not experts on developing code. So we needed another partner that was experts at developing code. So we brought in KPMG's forensics team. So KPMG has a forensic team, about 160 people, absolutely all very in tune with development and very in tune with how to develop software. Well, we had KPMG do things like look at every check-in for 2 years to make sure that there was no sign of nefarious activity. We had them look and review all of our build environments. We had them help with the activity that eventually found the insertion point being part of the build supply chain. So little statement here that all of the Sunburst code was not in our source control system. We saw no activity in the source control system. So it was in the products that were shipped. Hence the reason why it's called a supply chain attack. What happened is it was inserted into our build environment. That build environment was a Team City environment, spins up virtual machines to do work. Inside one of those virtual machines, and they're transient, they go away. That's where the insertion point happened. So they inserted a small little piece of code that then looked for Orion to be built, and then essentially inserted the Sunburst code into it. But in that supply chain is where the insertion occurred. So folks like KPMG helped. FBI was great. CISA, other government agencies were very good to amplify the truth, amplify these versions are good, these versions are bad. If you're doing this and you see second activity, do this. And then, NCSC in the UK was, very good to work with. But we essentially met with national defenders around the world to try to help, right, and get accurate information flowing everywhere.
Okay, yeah, you mentioned information there, and we've talked a little earlier about how it's not just about the technical response, it's as much about communication. What would you say is, if we have people thinking about their cybersecurity response, how much, if we're talking proportions here, of the response is technical, and how much, in terms of consideration, is the strategic communication response?
So they're all very important. Right. And one of the things also to think about when you have an incident occur is we had to split off into multiple streams. Right. And then we brought those streams back in at every night, essentially. So we did have a communication stream. We had a customer support stream. We had an engineering stream. We had an IT stream. And we had overarching kind of streams that coming back together, I ended up needing to be in every one of those a little bit. Simply because of the nature of what was going on. But when we looked at the deep level investigation in the IT systems, okay, that was a separate stream held by the IT group and the executive is associated with IT. So each one of those streams could run independently, be organized independently, wouldn't get slowed down because of a bottleneck of an independent person. So every part of those streams was very important. There wasn't one that was less important than the other, but communications, absolutely. Especially in our case, where people wanted to know, people wanted to talk to people wanted to get as accurate information as possible. So we stood up a website almost instantly with all the details, what we knew at that point in time. We were updating it 4 or 5 or 6 times a day, simply because the information that we knew would change. So the more forthright you can be, it was a question, right? How much public do we go? How much information do we share? We decided to share as much as we could, right? We shared the code to Sunspot. We shared the code to Sunburst. But sharing was the approach that we took because we thought it would just be better for the world, right? If we can make people aware of the threat actor, and then aware of what you can do from a response perspective.
Great. Well, we could talk for much, much longer, but we have run out of time. So thank you very much, Tim Brown, CISO of SolarWinds. Hopefully the audience found that very useful. Certainly, I'm seeing lots of positive responses. So thanks a lot.
Yep, absolutely. Glad to do it. Thank you, everybody, for your time.
Brilliant. Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye now.